A very good evening to each one of you. Uh, Friends here in India, we have a few from other parts of the world. So very good morning to you, Neville, and some others who have joined. Okay, so Professor Khandwala in the audience, while we'll speak about other things, but in the audience you have many students, many of your senior HR colleagues who are our senior HR colleagues who are your admirers. I see Professor Indra Parekh there, Professor Sekhar Chaudhary there, and many of your earlier colleagues are there. I'm sure more will be joining. So since many of you here, I have not had an opportunity to interact. A quick introduction about me. I'm an HR professional with about 34 years of career in this field. First 7 years, I worked with the Management Institute. I had the good fortune of working with likes of Professor Khandwala at IIM and then subsequently at Jamnalal Bajaj Institute. Last 22 years have been with the corporates, Tata Consultancy Services, L&T, and Sun Pharma. And it's about 5+ years that we have begun this my consulting outfit called Performance Enablers, the Growth Catalyst. While we offer HR services across the spectrum, but leadership and organizational development has been our focus. We have been doing conferences, panel discussions and tweet chats, etc. But as a part of those offerings, it was our view that if we have one-on-one conversations with people who have made their mark as a leader, who have attained eminence in the field of whatever is their chosen field, it will be of interest in terms of to the practitioners of leadership, to scholars, to researchers, to professional managers and everyone. So it is with this objective that we have begun this leadership series. And this is the first edition, and I'm delighted that so many of you have joined the first edition of this to be part of this conversation. Coming back to the most important part of the session, our guest for this evening, Professor Pradeep Khandwala. I think the name itself evokes such an respect in management circles, academic circles, among researchers, and actually this name doesn't require an introduction. If I'm going to briefly introduce him, it is more as a part of a customary process of introducing the guest. Sir, thank you so much for the support for this leadership series. We could not have had a better start of the series than having you as a guest. In as brief an introduction as I can possibly do, let me, if you really cover the entire body of work for Professor Khandwala, it possibly will fill the better part of the session. So I'm going to be as brief as I can. In terms of the research, both research papers and books, there are 7 areas where his work has been extensively published and acknowledged. Design and functioning of organizations is one. Indigenous styles of management and their distinctive features is another. Turnaround of organizations from sickness is yet another. Creativity at the individual, group, organizational, management and societal levels is yet another area where there have been significant publications. Effective management of public enterprises, yet extensive publications there. Effective democracy and public administration, again, an area of interest. where we have significant publications. The civilizational excellence and how in the modern context of market economy, democracy and developmental state is something that is his recent interest. And in 2007, we have had a path-breaking book from him, The Fast Forward Towards Civilizational Excellence Agenda for 2017. In all of these 7 themes, Professor Khandwala has been repeatedly published in some of the most globally respected journals. If I may just name a few, Administrative Science Quarterly, Academy of Management Journal, Abhigyan, Asia Pacific Journal of Management, Creative Research Journal, Indian Journal of Indian Industrial Relations, International Studies of Management and Organization, Journal of Accounting Research, Journal of Applied Behavioral Science, Journal of Business Administration, Journal of Euro-Asian Management, Journal of Management Studies, Organizational Studies, Productivity, RVB research papers, the Indian Journal of Social Science, Vikalpa, etc. These are journals where management professionals look up to the new knowledge being created in the field of management, as all of you would know. In terms of teaching, Professor Khandwala has taught at Carnegie Mellon University, US, McGill University in Canada, of course, Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, RVB Holland, University of Pittsburgh, US. In terms of providing leadership to academic activities, Professor Khandwala has been chairman of the OB area at Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. That was the time some of us had the good fortune to be working there. Chairman of Fellow Program of Management, that is a doctoral program of IIM Ahmedabad. Director of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Chairman of Editorial Board of Vikalpa, which is IIM Ahmedabad's journal. Chairman of Academic Council, Mundra Institute of Communication and Advertising. Chairman of Academic Council of Academy of HRD, and number of international conferences he has hosted. His consulting assignment cover majority of the public sector organizations and very large number of private sector organizations. In the interest of time, if I may just say that, and number of financial institutions. In terms of government bodies membership, he has been on the AICT's Board of Industry, Institution Interaction, Appointments Board, Department of Banking, Ministry of Finance, Gujarat State Planning Commission, Science Advisory Committee of the Cabinet, Government of India Task Force on IIMs for HRD. In terms of institutional boards and governing councils, number of institutions that he has guided as members of their board. Very large number of corporates where he is member of the board. In terms of honors and awards, of course, he won the Ford Foundation Doctoral Fellowship, Seagram Bronfam Research Award Canada, L&T Chair, IIMA, 4 Best Management Books of the Year Awards, 3 Lifetime Achievement Awards, and of course, he appears in a number of who's who lists that has been prepared. What some of us didn't know is his literary interests. I discovered it much later. 3 books of poems in English, 1 in Gujarati, a book of literary essays in Gujarati, translation of 2 books of Gujarati short stories of his wife, Mrs. Anjali Khandwala, into English, and number of other interests in that area. In terms of early years, of course, he is a commerce graduate from Sydenham College here in Mumbai, and then a chartered accountant, and then went on to do his MBA from Wharton, Ph.D. from Carnegie Mellon, and then the rest of it we have covered in his professional career. So, sir, your very presence inspires people to look up to how someone in one life could pack all of this. And therefore, to start a leadership series, I think, like I said, we couldn't have had a better start. So with that brief, if I may begin, all along, we have been on the other side of the table, questions being asked by you and people like us answering. Now I have my turn to ask you questions. So in terms of, if we, those of you who wish to open your videos, please feel free, but just keep muted so that you can, watch the interaction. And the very first question that I have, sir, is that, early in 1960s, when if somebody completed his chartered accountant, it was considered quite a professional accomplishment. He would have kind of settled down for a career and, as a chartered accountant would have risen there. But not you, you chose to do your MBA, and that too none other than from Wharton. And after Wharton, you could have easily landed a $1 million job, but not you. You chose to go for your PhD. So, this spirit of going for nothing but the best, help us trace the origin of it, and also help us understand how does one nurture this kind of a spirit, in more and more people. So that's my first question to you, sir.
Thank you, Pramod. First of all, I want to welcome all of you. I recognize some faces, I can't see others. But thank you so much for coming to this wonderful series. I want to thank Pramod for his initiative. We worked together at IMA, and even there I recognized a spark in him to lead and to learn. And I think he has proven it. He got a PhD and he has started this number of enterprises of this nature. So thank you, Pramod, for inviting me to be the first in this leadership series. Although I can't see myself as a leader, I can see myself as a performance enabler, as your organization says. And I'll explain that later. But let me come to my sort of initial years, the influences that have shaped me. Remember, no human being is a replica of his parents or his times or her times. It's a chemistry, and chemistry of self, in genetic inheritance, environment, culture, exposure to other people, exposure to knowledge, educational institutions, and so on, opportunities. So in my case also, I think it's been that. From the beginning, my guess is that I really enjoyed learning. This is my chief characteristic, that I enjoyed learning. Even as a chartered accountant student, Pramod, I used to audit the books of account of a number of companies as an article clerk in Mumbai. Mm-hmm. And I used to ask later on the managers there as to what had produced these figures in the balance sheet and profit and loss account. What decisions they had taken that had led to these figures. Now, normally a person who is an auditor simply audits whether the transaction is appropriate or not and moves on. In my case, I was curious. And when I finished my CA, I wasn't sure that I wanted to be one more auditor. I mean, it was quite a boring thing for me. So I thought that, look, I got interested in management because of my interaction with these managers in a variety of settings. And I thought, let me get an MBA. And then when I come back, I'll be a management consultant and management auditor, auditing management itself, rather than be simply an auditor and tax consultant. That was the idea. And so I went to Wharton to get an MBA. Mm-hmm. Now, Wharton was a remarkable place. I had not seen anything like that in India. I went to a very good college. Sydenham College was a fine place. But Wharton was simply something else. I mean, you had classrooms where you could ask any questions. We were discussing cases as we used to do, have been doing at IMA. We used to discuss research reports, case studies, and it was a very open atmosphere. And secondly, what I liked at Wharton very much was there is such a freedom of choosing courses. I went on a binge, if you like, of choosing quite different courses. For example, course in regional science. Many of you may not even have heard of the name of regional science, but it was that time a kind of rising discipline. and of course in organization behavior and behavioral sciences, industrial organization, which is economic subject, Ph.D. level courses in finance, and so on. I mean, just a number of courses that excited my imagination. One particular course shaped me very much. This was a course that was offered by Professor Alvarin Phillips, who was an economist, and by focus, he was a person who studied market structures, conduct and performance. Not just individual firms, but the whole industry and how the whole market structure functions. And in that course, I happened to read the work of Herbert Simon and Sayat and March, and so on, the organization theories. Now, they were quite different because I had studied economics at Sydenham and also at Wharton. And, I was quite I was bugged with the assumptions of microeconomics. I didn't like them at all. It simply oversimplified reality. And here were these organization theorists who came up with some remarkable insights into the way organizations function, the way they make decisions, the way they allocate resources, the way they resolve conflicts, the way they recruit people, and so on. Really good sort of management insights into how organizations function, how they get designed. And so I guess in that course, I decided that I want to be an organization theorist. And then I applied for a postdoctoral fellowship, which was very competitive. From all over America, some 50 or 100 scholars were selected, and I was one of them, lucky. I could go to Harvard. I was, in fact, admitted to Harvard DBA program. But I heeded the advice of Dr. Alvarin Phillips that if you're really interested in organization theory, the prime place in the world today is Carnegie Tech. That's where Simon and Sayat and March and so on are there. And intellectually, you'll find it a very stimulating place. And so I opted to go to Carnegie Tech, which now is Carnegie Mellon University. And it was a wonderful situation. I mean, here was a 25-year-old chap from India, and one could sit across people like Herbert Simon at the coffee hour and chat. Herbert Simon, Nobel laureate. So it was a beautiful intellectual journey. And I came across contingency theory, the notion that organizations are shaped by the context. So previously there was these universal theories of management. There are some best principles of management that you must adhere to. And unfortunately, every very top manager announced his own principles. So there was a lot of confusion. Contingency theories came with a very scientific approach. That look, organizations cannot be managed simply by principles. You have to look at the context in which they operate, their size, their technology, their marketing environment, and so on. And then you can derive principles of application based on research, not just armchair speculation, but research. And I think that made me a researcher and a very, if you like, contingency theory type of researcher. Later, I came across strategic choice theory and synergy theory. And I welded these together when I went to McGill for teaching. At McGill, I wrote this book, The Design of Organizations, which was a 700 plus page survey of the entire literature of organization theory. And it quickly became an international textbook. Doctoral programs all over the world use that as a textbook. And I did my research in Canada, got the C. Graham Research Award that you mentioned, there for my research on organization design. And then I guess we had always, my wife and I had always wanted to come back to India. I think I should maybe share some of my family background, just to give the context.
Yes, please.
I was born in a family where my maternal grandfather was a versatile genius, K.M. Munshi. Some of you may have heard his name. He was Gujarat's top novelist. He was a constitutional lawyer who was in the Ambedkar Committee to frame the Indian Constitution, Food Minister of India, and so on, number of founder of Bharati Vidya Bhavan. And so that was a role model in sorts, because his vision was, how can we blend the best in Indian culture and the best in Western culture to produce holistic Indians who are global citizens but with a strong Indian identity. I think that was his vision. And I accepted that vision very much. And he was not the only person who was my role model in my family. My father was a freedom fighter. So there was this nationalistic sort of atmosphere in my family. We had very many educationists in our family. I'll tell you about my paternal grandfather. He was a medical doctor, hopeless at finance, became insolvent. But he had a tremendous yen for learning. So that at the age of 60 plus, he went to Berkeley for a degree in comparative religion. Imagine a medical doctor past the age of 60, he got a scholarship for this. They went to Berkeley to get a degree or something in comparative religion. And there was an aunt who was a head of education department in Mumbai and so on, number of people. So this was, in a sense, my family background. We were not wealthy, but well-to-do, middle-class family. But there was a strong nationalistic thing. I went to a school where Tagore was very important, Gandhiji was very important. And these molded me. Not wholly, obviously. There's always a residue that is, in fact, autonomous. You are Pramod Solanki and that's what you are. I mean, it may be your family and so on, but nonetheless, at the end of the day, there is a Pramod Solanki is unique. So similarly, in my case also, I did imbibe these influences at a time when India had just become independent. And it was a post-Gandhian era, Nehruvian era of 1960s and so on. And then in America and so forth. So this was, in a sense, my upbringing and my orientation. Learning was terribly important for me. Not so much power. I was never power-oriented. I never wanted to become a mass leader or, throw my weight around. That was not my style. My style was to learn and disseminate. That's why this performance enabler strikes me as a very apt description of me. That I, as a student of management, enable people to perform better, more effectively as managers and as human beings. The other thing I want to stress is serendipity has played a very big role in my life. I as I told you, I became an organization theorist by accident. I went to Wharton, took a course by Alvin Phillips, got exposure to organization theories, and opted to become an organization theorist. At Carnegie Tech, preparing for my doctoral qualifiers, I was working like mad. It was a very tough exam. And at about 1 o'clock in the morning in the library, I happened to look at a book called Creativity and Intelligence. Now, I was intrigued by the title, Creativity and Intelligence. I always thought that intelligent people are creative, but I thought, let me take a look and fall asleep looking at it because I was exhausted. And I tell you, I read through the book for 2 days. In the midst of preparation for my doctoral exams, which are about a month away, I was so engrossed by the book. This was a study of very creative children and a group of very high-IQ children. So you had two contrasting samples in a highbrow Chicago school. And the differences fascinated me. That exposure to that book was a turning point in my career in terms of wanting me to study creativity. So at McGill, instead of taking any courses in creativity, never taken any courses in creativity, but I offered a course in creativity so that I could learn a lot more about creativity. And then, as you know, at IIM and elsewhere, I conducted many programs on creativity. I have 4 books on creativity, ranging from individual to social creativity and so on. So that was a second example of serendipity. Then when I came back to IIMA, I was full of these ideas of applying Western management knowledge to Indian organizations that I thought were pathetically functioning. That was my assumption. So I said, no, I think I should test my assumption. So I spent over a year studying indigenous modes of management. I went to share brokers, I went to bankers, I went to Setia companies in Mumbai and Ahmedabad, and of course also to professionally managed companies and multinational companies. And I tell you, it was a big revelation that Indian management was far more diverse than was imagined, far more dynamic, far more resourceful. That resulted, plus the research work I did, into the book Management Styles, where I talked about 10 different management styles. And interestingly, this was again a serendipitous finding. Altruistic style, the goodness style, the caring style came out to be the top style in terms of various criteria of effectiveness. So that was another serendipitous thing. Then I came up, the IDBI was very interested in trying to probe into the whole question of sickness. At that time, corporate sickness was rampant in India, and in fact has been growing. And so Dr. Bhatt of IDBI told me, Pradeep, would you like to do a study of sick companies, some of which have turned around, some of which have not turned around? I said, fine, I'll do it. So I did case studies of 10 companies, and I think Shekhar was also involved in that study, if I'm not mistaken. I saw Shekhar somewhere.
Yes, he is.
So Shekhar was also involved in that study. And it was, Shekhar is right there. Yes. It was a remarkable revelation to find that the contrast between companies that had actually turned around and the companies that had failed to turn around. And basic difference was dynamic management. Basic difference was leadership. That's why leadership is so important. Here were people, and I saw them at first time because Shekhar and I went to these companies and saw them at work, actually sort of, handling board meetings and so on, talking to them, talking to their subordinates, right down to the worker level. And so he got a very good inkling of what makes for exceptional management in the Indian context. And so that resulted in 3 turnaround books. I did that study plus ultimately a study of 120 turnarounds from all over the world. So that was my, if you like, my foray into turnaround management. Again, serendipity. I had not planned for it, but Dr. Bhatt said that, why don't you take a look? And I took a look and happened to find a gold mine. Then another serendipity was, I was invited to offer a paper in the United States on a conference on organizations of wisdom and courage. David Cooper Ryder and another chap, our Indian, I forget the name. Anyway, they had organized it. And I had not paid much attention to altruistic modes of management. I knew that altruistic style of management works very well, but I didn't know much about that. So for that paper, I read very widely. And I came up with several different modes of goodness in companies. Philanthropy is obviously one, giving charity money. But corporate social responsibility, business ethics, contribution to national priorities, spirituality in management. I came across companies that had that. Spiritual practices were there. And domain development, where companies took an enlightened view of their own industry and set up facilities for the more improvement of the other organizations, the rivals, in fact. This was again an altruistic thing, like, for example, Mudra setting up MICA in Ahmedabad. Mudra is an advertising major, and to set up MICA for nurturing other advertisers is an altruistic thing. And similarly, other people have also done it. Tatas have done it, and Mittalls have done it, and so on. A number of people have done it. So this was another feature of goodness that I uncovered. So eventually, that led me to look at goodness and whether goodness is profitable or not. Now, goodness is a good thing in itself. It's an end in itself. But if it also is a means to better performance, then the appeal to business people becomes much stronger, isn't it? So I looked at a lot of research done in the West and a little bit in India. And I found that, in fact, there were more studies showing a positive link between corporate social responsibility and profitability than negative findings. And then I also found some other studies where it was found that people who, that the companies that did were good companies, CSR companies, ethics companies, they were much more attracted to young people, new people who wanted to come in, and also to customers. So you had a situation where I found that goodness pays. And I came up with this model of corporate greatness, which said essentially that we at IMA, we teach profit maximization, and that we think is great. But true greatness, in my view, was greatness which involved both excellence at business and excellence at goodness. Then you combine the two, and through innovation, because goodness is expensive. You can't be good in a world that is not so good. There are your rivals are bribing and so on. To remain straight is painful. It causes problems. So to be able to do that, they had to be innovative. They had to find new products, new technologies, new ways of functioning so that they could make up for the loss of revenues due to their being straight. Now, this is a very major message, I think, to our Indian management. And I'm glad that some Indian schools, I'm not sure that whether IIMs have gone that far, but I know of some schools that have indeed. There's this Crow Talent School, School of Inspired Leadership in Delhi, not Delhi, but a suburb of Delhi, which is where each student spends in a group 1 day a week working with an NGO. The business school, 1 year business school program, people with experience come there, but they try to impart that kind of Indian exposure, and they spend 1 week in the Himalayas at the retreat of Swami Chinmayanand. So you see that, and of course at Irma, again, people are sent off during the vacation for a stint with the villagers and so on. So there are business schools that are doing it, and I would wish very much that the IIMs, which are so prestigious, should extend their model of excellence to include goodness in companies. How do you manage goodness? Not simply say be good, but the nuts and bolts of corporate social responsibility management, nuts and bolts of business ethics management, and so on. Now, this was another serendipitous thing that I came across. Then,
so I hate to interject, but I'm sure there have been many, landmark turns, and each one is bringing out, your sheer curiosity and courage of conviction. How did you go after it and really dug out a gold out of it? And that is how all of these are there in your body of work in the form of books and journals. I just thought there are other areas about you that people will be interested. So if
I'd like 2 more minutes.
Okay.
To talk about 2 other serendipitous things that are important.
Okay.
One was my foray in government. Government in India and across developing countries has been awful. And I came across this new public management which had been spawned in Britain. Conference Secretary asked me to do a study of Indian government. The government of India also did ask me to study of public administration in India. And that opened my eyes to the power of new public management, particularly agencyfication, which is what brings in professional management and replaces bureaucracy with professional management. This has worked in a number of countries, over 50 countries. And so that was one more serendipity. And lastly was this civilization excellence thing. I was extremely upset at the quality of our civilization. And I said, can we do something about it? Or just criticize and, nothing we can do about it. So I read very widely on civilization excellence, historical books, anthropological books, and so on and so forth, economics, and came up with models of how societies could transform themselves into higher quality civilizations, not simply higher growth and GDP, but higher quality civilization, which means more humane, more creative, and more performance excellence oriented. That was how I defined it. Anyway, that completes my, if you like, repertoire of serendipity.
Yeah, sure. It gives a glimpse of how life has been, and from an article clerk, like you said, asking how did these figures come, to learning, curiosity, and going after things where you saw, and that's how such landmark work has been created. So I think so strongly the learning, curiosity, and the courage of conviction, and then go after it with the passion. I can see in each one of these pieces that you have taken up, and the books and the articles that have come out of those work are landmarks. Even they're referred by researchers, by teachers, by leaders across the globe. I think that's a very important learning from here. As we go on, since we may run out of time, if you people want to post some questions, please continue posting in the chat box. We would try and take them up as much as we can. So the other question that I had, sir, is, research is one kind of activity. Teaching, of course, is associated, but still, it's I am reminded of Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan, the former executive director of Tata Sons, who says when you go to teach in a class, it's like a performing art. I mean, sure you know, but every time you're handling a class and you have to perform. So teaching, research, consulting, each one has a slightly different facet, but in each one of these, whatever you have done very clearly stands out. So how do you explain this consistency that whatever you do, it'll have a certain bracket? What would you say about that?
I can only say that I'm a good listener, and I've learned that from Indira and from TV and Uday, that to really help people unfurl themselves, reveal themselves, to have a meaningful dialogue, you need to listen with empathy. Not that I am always very successful at that, I can be rough sometimes, but I do try to work with people to try to understand them and then try to help them the way we can, the way I can. I think that's been one of, I don't direct too much in my classes also. I used to emphasize much more questioning by students than lecturing. And that's why I like the case method. And Indira and I had, if you remember Indira, we had designed games for the first year PGPs.
Yes.
A whole day, where, we got simulations and competitions and so on and so forth. Created a set of an industry where firms competed with money. So, token money, of course. So, that experiential learning is something that I enjoy. And even at this, I forgot one more serendipity, but I'll mention it here. After I retired, one chap came to me, Mr. Amit Bhatia, serial entrepreneur and a visionary. And he said that he would like to create a fellowship of 1,000 social leaders who can push forward India. Social leaders are NGO heads, CSR heads, heads of foundations that give money to these bodies and so on. Basically people, organizations with a social conscience. And I said, well, I have no experience of this at all. And I have not done any research. I said, you don't teach her. Not expecting you to teach, but you get them to explore themselves. Their listening became important. We used poetry, we used readings, we used to have people come in like Ella Bhatt and so on to talk about their lives. At each retreat, we had a check-in where people shared their life stories, each one of 20 people or so. They check out, they shared what they had learned. And my role was really to, in a sense, orchestrate a smooth flow of these things, but not really teach. Yes, once in a while I gave some ideas. Basically, it was very non-directive. So I think this non-directive direction, if you like, contradiction in terms,
Right.
is something that I enjoy. Direction not to impose my views, but direction to help the person to evolve his or her own mature views. That is my objective.
Sure. That's
And creativity,
important.
of course, is important to me. So I
Mhm.
like divergent thinking. I like people to come up with ideas.
Sure. I think that explains why students are also to be able to be their best. And I guess that explains why, even as a teacher, you were always a sought after teacher and very large number of enrollments at IMA in your course. And they had a very interesting practice, based on the feedback, students will recognize the teachers at IMA. They have interesting practice. And, they'll gather post dinner in the Louis Kahn Plaza in that space. And whoever is a highly rated professor, they will, kind of give them bumps and throw them in the air. And whenever I was there, you were always one of them whom they had to, they wanted to throw you.
That was not all, Pramod. At Holi, they used to dump us in the tank, water tank.
That's right.
Holi time, near my house, there's a tank.
That was their ways of expressing their affection. I still remember those. So I think this approach to, I like this phrase, non-directive direction, even though it may appear like a contradiction in terms. I think that's what allows a space for the students to express and engage. And that is where your teaching, whereas, as sought after as your research or any other part of the work. I still have a few questions, but I hear my friend, Mr. Sanmitra Trivedi, has a question. Can I unmute you? And you, Sanmitra, you please go ahead. He's one of your admirers.
Yeah.
Can I see him? Yeah.
Yes, sir, you can see me.
Yes, sir.
So, sir, I came to know about you at 22-year-old lad. Today I am 54. When I read your book in the company library, of course, in those days, there used to be company library on organization. So I know you that way from that time and admired you. I just wanted to know one thing as I was listening to you very attentively as to how could you read so much in so many books and how could you acquire so much of learning from it? And I know the answer is not in faster reading, answer is not there, it's something else. And what would be your advice to somebody like me, sir?
I don't think there's an advice, Sanmitra. I think it's inner fire to learn that makes you read. It's like being a detective. You find a clue, you follow it, find another clue, you follow it. Similarly, when I'm studying something, I find something interesting that leads me to something else that is interesting in that area, and so on. And I don't cease until I really have got my fingers into that subject. So yes, I read also. I've read also a lot, but I think it's been a very directed reading.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So that's I'm sure that's something everybody would want to learn from. Now my own view is that knowing and understanding is of course extremely important. Being able to practice your understanding, your perspectives, your knowledge, and you are someone who have also been, if I may say, practitioner of leadership. There are a number of leadership roles in academic context, in the institutional context. I'm sorry, that you have played. Chairman of OB area at the institute, chairman of fellow program committee, finally as a director of IIM Ahmedabad at a time when I thought a lot had changed for IIM. It was very significant changes happening in the ecosystem. Just help us reflect, this knowledge, not many can match, like my friend Sanmitra said, in terms of what you have learned, created, contributed, everything. In terms of practice of leadership, and what are your reflections from those roles which were clearly significant leadership roles in running some of these bodies? Just share your reflections of, playing those roles.
Fair amount of pain It's a pleasure.
Okay. Okay.
As I told you, I am not very oriented towards administrative positions.
Okay.
I was cajoled into becoming director of IIM.
Okay.
The chairman of the board called my wife that Pradeep is refusing. Please explain to him.
I know it today now.
Yeah. So my wife talked to me and said, "All right, this kind of a thing, I'll take it up." But at
Call
that
you
time,
back in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Yes. We will. Yeah. Please finish, Professor. Then we.
Yeah.
Indra Parikh wants to say something.
Yeah. Indra, I was fairly strict, I must say. Not very popular.
Mm-hmm.
Some people hated me. The performers liked me, but there were also non-performers who were not very happy with me. And there were some people who misbehaved. One was caught for plagiarism and had to terminate him. Another was caught beating his wife and had to terminate him. So there were these cases where they were good friends of mine. But in the institutional interest, one had to take certain steps. After due process, of course. It was not arbitrary because it was done, had to be done. But at the same time, I did try to align my role. There are many things I did at IIM. One thing I would like to perhaps talk about, perhaps is not so well known perhaps, is that I try to align IIMA with the emerging India, post-liberalization. Post-liberalization, the economy had opened up and lots of new energy was there. And I thought that IIMA must play a part in this revitalization of the country. So I helped set up 4 new groups. One was a group on pioneering and innovative entrepreneurship, because that was the kind, what you call startups. That is the kind that was important for our country at that time, new industries. Second was the educational innovation space. IIMA had been innovative in education, but we wanted to spread that innovation much further. And therefore, the Education Innovation Group was set up. The third thing was the public policy management group. We already had a public systems group that studied railways and shipping and public systems. But public policy management, how do you formulate policy? How do you implement it? What goes into the making? How do you communicate policy to the wider audience? That I thought was an important research area, and for which we set up this public policy management group. And the fourth group was our companies had been used to a fairly closed economy up till that time, protected. And they had to transition themselves to a global marketplace. So I set up this international management group, which was to study international management. How do you internationalize your operations? How do you compete in the global marketplace and so on? And the idea was that each of these groups would develop their own research agenda and eventually offer courses, PGP type courses, MDPs and so on, FPM type courses in these areas. That was the vision. And that is, I don't know whether it succeeded or not. It probably didn't work too well. But nonetheless, that was the idea.
Oh.
Indira?
Yes, over to you.
Yes, I wanted to just share 2 experiences with Pradeep when he was the director. And he used the word performance enabler. So I thought I would give the example of what that meant. Okay. First, he made me the PGP chairman of there's a very prestigious position. Sure. And I was the first woman to be that. And I think all the faculty were surprised. But that is the way he said, you can do it, so go ahead and do it. Because I was a bit apprehensive. I was young. I was just starting a bit and all of that. The second one was that he had an invitation to go to McGill University to read a paper. He says, Indira, I'm too busy. Will you go? Of course, I was very happy to go. But the fact that he sent me to read a paper at McGill made a lot of difference to me in terms of my confidence, in terms of my lot of other things, in terms of what I could and could not do, and my own status in the institute. It changed completely. And the third was a very personal, very sensitive. I was struggling with some of the issues of growing up. And at a certain age, I went and told Pradeep, I want to leave. He said, why? I said, because. He said, what do you want to do? I said, nothing. He did not give me leave. He said, when you figure out why, then you come and talk to me. And I actually figured it out, what I was doing. And I went and said, okay, I don't want to leave. He said, no, if you want to leave, I'll give it to you. That is the level of sensitivity of a person's struggle which he is open to. I thought I would like to share it.
No,
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. I think this is how you bring out the best, what the person is capable of doing. And thanks for sharing this. In 2017, of course, it was there as a part of your interest earlier as well. You brought out this book, Fast Forward Towards Civilizational Excellence, Agenda for India. Humanness, creativity, and excellence. It's like all encompassing, covering every facet of our, national life, societal life, societal aspect, if you want to call it. Help us understand what was the thinking behind putting this book together, and how ideally you would have liked the book to be, fully leveraged in terms of, what it can be used for.
I'm not very good at marketing my books, so let's skip that part. But I think basically most of us in this gathering here are concerned about the quality of our civilization. There's so much of strife, so much of hatred, so much of violence, so much of corruption. And it bugged me. Frankly, it bugged me that how can we tolerate this nonsense? So what can we do about it? Obviously, we do criticize. We often say this government is lousy, that government is lousy. People are doing this and people are doing that. Yes, but why are they doing it? What can we do about it? I think that practical bent is there in me. So I tried to identify, I read very widely on this because I was very intrigued by this whole question of civilizational excellence. People in India talk about GDP and becoming the largest economy and world power and all that. I didn't have much interest in those. Not that I don't. Of course, I want the GDP to be high, obviously, and India to be recognized. That's not the point. Point is that does not necessarily mean civilizational greatness. Civilizational greatness is when you are a humane society, when you are a creative and innovative society, and when you have a lot of competence around so that you can execute innovations successfully. That is my core understanding. And mind you, this all comes from my work at the level of enterprises and so on. Because I'd seen this work in my concepts of management excellence. At the enterprise level, I had seen this. At the government level, I had seen this. So I wanted to extend this idea to the larger society. And I read very widely, as I mentioned earlier, history and anthropology and economics and sociology and so on, of course, management. And I came up with 3 different approaches to enhancing civilization excellence. One was to identify virtuous cycles that had happened in other countries like Sweden or like Norway or like Japan, post-war Germany, where something had triggered an upward spiral, what we call a virtuous cycle, which leads to goodness, which in turn leads to further innovation, further goodness, creativity, humanness, and so on. So identified some 7 or 8 different virtuous cycles that could be triggered by anything from South Korean export-led growth, for example, in the 1960s, to China's investment in health and education, which made the Chinese from lifespan of 30 to 70 plus, and so on. India also to some extent, and other countries. The second was to look at each institution of the society, family, community, enterprises, not-for-profits, NGOs, and other civil society institutions, and government, and ask what can be done to make them more creative, innovative, more humane, and more competent. Luckily, I had done that work. If you look at my prior work, at many levels I had done this work, or have been exposed to this work. So I could do that. So you build from the basis. You build up the basis to be humane and be creative and competent, and then you build it up so that altogether, they converge to civilization greatness. Third was to take each facet of functioning of our society and ask whether it is moving towards creativity or not, whether it's moving towards humanness or not, whether it's moving towards goodness or not. Like enterprises, are they becoming more humane, more CSR oriented, more ethics oriented, or not? Or criminalities is on the increase. So for each facet of living, we could ask this question: are we progressing or are we regressing? And from this, you can build up indices of progress and regression. And where there is regression, you can take affirmative action. So that is what I've tried to write in this book, where I've tried to first look at major institutions and then how they can be transformed, and later on including enterprises and government, and then later on this virtuous cycles, and then these detailed micro questions of various facets of life in India, world. And I thought this is a very practical, in my opinion, very practical ways by which you can leapfrog across decades. We are kind of gradually moving towards good-bad civilization. There's some goodness and some badness, and I'm not sure the mix is right. But towards a much better civilization, if we try to understand these and follow these ideas.
Sure. And there's a gold mine there, and I guess as people learn more about it, I think it's a matter of time. I'm sure it will be put to good use going forward. We are nearing the end of the time, and if there are no questions from the audience, or if there is one, please go ahead. Anyone? Or else I have a last question. I saw somebody waving.
Krishna Kumar?
Okay. Please.
Krishna Kumar.
Yes. Please go ahead, Mr. Kumar.
Sir, you started writing the book on creativity after I passed out from IMA.
Fourth I.
1979, I passed out, and you wrote that book in 82, 83.
84, yeah.
When I was in Bangalore. But from day one, I was using that book in my course on business policy.
I see.
Management of change and creativity. And it's like ghost. It doesn't get out of you. And
that's good ghost, I hope.
That is why I'm asking a very simple question. To what extent you should encourage people to be creative, and then say beyond that, no. Why? I indulged in last 1.5 years on variety of things, and several innovations came out. And to me, it occurred that if you happen to be creative, the idea starts bombarding you like the firework Anar. So I wrote a case Anar and sent for an international conference. And one of the reviewers' opening sentence was, I'm not able to understand it. The author seems to be an eccentric retired professor. And I had just completed 10 years of retirement.
That's true, isn't it?
So for the first time, I getting international certification of being eccentric. because the person could not understand what the hell I'm doing. And exactly today, what I have been doing whole day is I have written in that teaching note, does this fellow qualify for being called idiot grade 6? Because idiot grade 4 and 5 I have written. Whether the fellow qualifies for idiot grade 6. And what is that idiocity? In the teaching note I had written, does this fellow qualify? And in the teaching note I said, this question cannot be answered before 31st July. Maybe on 15th August I'll give this answer. And the answer was, yes, he is idiot grade 6. Why? This is first time a retired professor, 10 years, surviving on his pension, is setting up an oxygen generating plant, low cost oxygen generating plant for a small hospital with cylinder filling capacity. This is the first plant in the country. I am funding it from my pocket and I'm donating it so that it becomes a model for home hospitalization, where nursing support is there, where oxygen support is there, where cooking support is there, so that on the smallest attack of corona, one has not to rush to hospital and burden the doctors. Now, so I am qualifying and it is coming true verbatim. 15th August, I am going to launch it, hopefully.
Congratulations, Krishna Kumar. You do us proud, my friend.
Sir, should we stop here or is there something beyond international certification of eccentricity?
I think you have to lead the way. Krishna Kumar, you have to lead the way. Become more eccentric and then we'll see.
Thanks very much for sharing, sir. Thanks very much for sharing. Professor T. Rao, you were wanting to share something? I'm sure you and Professor Khandwala have had a long time together.
Well, it's a pleasure to listen to you once again, Pradeep. I'm in Bangalore and nice to see you.
Thank you.
As energetic as you have always been. We worked together. I think as soon as Pradeep joined IIM, we conducted the first workshop on creativity in GSFC in Baroda.
Yes.
And it was an interesting experience for me. I learned my creativity, part of it from Pradeep. And then this manual, I think, was developed. And then later we did it in Mahabaleshwar. That's where Anil Sachdev happened to be one of the participants.
Yes.
Vinay Shil Gautam and a whole lot of others. Then after that, we did one with the Nimid on Train the Trainers, National Institute of Motivational Institutional Development and so on. And I think it has been a great pleasure, I think, working with Pradeep. Pradeep is a great scholar. I'm so happy that he presented the history and the way, I think, the kind of people that influenced him and so on. I think even today he continues to be a scholar influencing people. And he is right. It's not the question of his marketing. I think for some reason, I wish there were right agencies to make his books known. And I see a very gradual shift from creativity at individual level to civilizational level. It's such a wonderful contribution across the last 50, 45 and odd years. And I think this is a immeasurable, invaluable kind of an addition and contribution that Pradeep has made. And it's such a pleasure to have him around. He also contributed to the Academy of HRD.
Yes.
I think in so many ways he keeps on inspiring people there. The doctoral program, I think it continues to grow and so on. So nice of you, I think, Pramod, to have managed to get Pradeep to share some of these thoughts. I'm sure your recording will be available to many others who may not have had the opportunity.
Yes, by all means. And it is kind of him to have agreed. Actually, I have my friend L.S. Murthy and Mr. Rajan and all. Immediately after I shared, they said, how did you manage to get him? He is not a very active person in public forums. I said, I used my influence as his student. And that's how we agreed. Very kind of him. But thanks, TV, for sharing this. I'm sure Both of you have done wonderful work in the space. People like us have grown up in HR field reading your work. It's wonderful to have all of you, together here. It actually gives us a sense of closure. Professor Khandwala, any parting message to people who are in leadership roles?
Are you suggesting my parting?
No, I mean, as a
I'm 81, so I thought that perhaps you're hinting that I should go.
As a closing part of this session, people who are in leadership roles, what will be your message?
I think the only thing I can say is that leadership is a calling. It's not just career and money and position, power. And you are best as a leader when you are least powerful. That's least power oriented. Where you are sharing your life with people. What is the best you can offer? Obviously, the limitations here, but nonetheless, whatever you can offer. That way, I have a great admiration for Gandhi. He was not a position holder last 30, 40 years of his leadership of India. He once became the president of Congress, otherwise he was nobody. And after independence also he was nobody. He didn't become president of India, the prime minister of India. But he gave his best.
Yet he gave his best. And
I think that is the important thing. You give your best. And then things work out. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't work out. But that's okay. That's fine.
Sure. Very profound, sir. And we could go on listening to you right from the very first question as you shared your life journey. It was a compelling kind of sharing, and people were glued to it. I personally have gleaned a few things, how another individual who was doing MBA and PhD grows into the person that we know as Professor Khandwala. And I personally at least feel that some of the things that distinguish a person in whatever he or she takes up, you have so simply and so powerfully articulated that those of us who are keen to take these lessons in their respective field of work will benefit tremendously. I hope I speak for others listening here. One, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for supporting this effort of ours. Idea is to bring people like you from different walks of life and have this up close and personal interaction because as you share a part of you. And in that sense, it becomes very inspiring. And I think it touches people rather than what they can read about you in the book or in the articles. So I strongly believe that these conversations with the leaders would enrich our understanding of practice of leadership. And that's the objective with which we have started. And I can't thank you enough for giving such a head start to this effort. Thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
And each one of this is the first edition. So many senior HR colleagues, senior professors, Professor T.V. Rao, Professor Krishna Kumar, Professor Sekhar Chaudhary, Professor Indra Parekh, and so many other young friends. I see Professor J.K. Mitra from earlier Faculty of Management Studies, and so many of my Twitter friends from India and outside. I think they got interested and they're all here. So thank you so much, each one of you. And let me just say that, Professor Indra Parekh, you want to say something? Okay. So let me just say that we will have people from different walks of life, and as we go forward and to subsequent editions of these conversations, feel free to share your feedback. Learning, like Professor Khandwala shared, is a lifelong thing. And this platform will also remain another source of learning. Whatever feedback you want to share, the team at Performance Enablers, the mail that you would have got with the registration link, you can use the same link to share your feedback so that we keep improving in the subsequent sessions. So in about a month's time, we will be back with yet another distinguished leader, I assure you, sharing his life journey, his or her life journey, on this platform. So until then, once again, Professor Khandwala, it's so wonderful to see you. And at this age, intellectual agility and energy is something you will give a run for life for many younger people. So happy to see you. And thank you very much, each one of you. And until we meet, goodbye. Thanks very much.